The annual family dinner was a battlefield I'd long ago surrendered on, yet I still showed up every year out of some misplaced sense of duty. This time, I was on call, so I arrived in my Air Force dress uniform, the formal blues feeling stiff and out of place amidst the floral decor of my parents' dining room. The air was already thick with forced cheer, every ounce of it directed at my sister, Tiffany, the family's effervescent golden child. She had just been promoted to assistant marketing manager, and to hear my parents tell it, you'd think she had just brokered world peace. They hung on her every word, their pride so loud it was suffocating. Tiffany, after soaking in the adoration for a solid hour, finally turned her attention to me. A slow, condescending smirk spread across her face as she gestured with a wine glass toward my uniform. "So, are you still doing that little army thing, Violet?" she asked, her tone dripping with mock curiosity. "Is that badge from Amazon?" My little brother Kevin, a kid who had learned long ago that echoing Tiffany was the path of least resistance, let out a dutiful chuckle. My parents, they just smiled weakly, saying nothing. Their silence was always the worst part, a quiet confirmation that my life, my career, my entire world was little more than an embarrassing hobby to them. I felt that familiar crushing weight settle in my chest, the same weight I felt when they forgot my officer commissioning ceremony because Tiffany had a bad breakup. My mouth opened to say something. Anything. But before I could speak, a sharp crackle cut through the room. The old wall-mounted intercom, a relic normally used to summon us for dinner as kids, sparked to life. A voice, sterile and stripped of all emotion, echoed through the sudden silence, each word landing like a hammer blow. It was a voice from my world, not theirs, and it didn't ask for permission to interrupt. "Major Violet Ward, Airstrike window approved. Proceed immediately." The laughter died. My brother, who moments before was slouching in his chair, suddenly stood up straight. In the deafening silence, all I could think was, they had no idea who I was. And they never had. That hollow silence in the dining room wasn't new. It was just louder now. To understand how a military directive could land like an alien transmission in my own family's home, you have to understand the story they'd been telling themselves for 20 years. It was a story with a hero and a side character. And I was never the hero. The perfect example is my sister Tiffany's 21st birthday. My parents had been complaining for months about how tight money was, how the mortgage was a killer, how they'd have to skip a vacation that year. I'd taken them at their word, sending what I could from my ROTC stipend to help out, eating ramen for weeks so they wouldn't worry. Then came the party. It was a lavish affair, with catered food and a DJ, a spectacle for all their friends to witness. My mother, Carol, a woman who measured love in grand public gestures, was in her element. The grand finale was in the driveway. There, gleaming under the porch light, was a brand new convertible, a massive red bow stuck to the hood. For Tiffany, it wasn't just a car, it was a coronation. And as they celebrated her for scraping by with a C average in her community college business classes, I didn't just see the car. I saw the specialized training course I didn't apply for because it had a fee. I saw the laptop I'd saved for a year to buy after my old one died. I saw every "we can't afford it, honey" they had ever said to me. All of it was a lie, a carefully constructed narrative to fund their golden child. My high school graduation, 3 years earlier, was a much quieter affair. I had graduated third in my class with full honors. More importantly, I had earned a full 4-year ROTC scholarship to a top-tier university, a full ride that would cost my parents nothing. I was so proud I felt like I could fly. I handed my dad the acceptance letter, my hands trembling with excitement, expecting, I don't know what. A hug? A congratulations? My father, a man who believed a child's purpose was to be a prettier, more successful reflection of himself, scanned the letter with a tight expression. He handed it back to me, his gift a few clipped words that landed like stones in my stomach. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "I guess we don't have to worry about paying for you anymore. Just try not to get into trouble playing soldier." And right there, the roles were set in stone. That was the moment the false narrative was born, the family myth they would repeat until they believed it themselves. Tiffany was the social one, the one who brightens up a room. Her neediness was repackaged as family-oriented, her lack of ambition as being down-to-earth. I, on the other hand, was the intense one. My discipline was called rigidity. My focus was labeled antisocial. My ambition to serve, to be part of something bigger than myself, was painted as a deliberate, almost cruel, rejection of them and their picket fence dreams. It was easier to brand me as a cold, difficult loner than to admit they simply didn't value the things I was breaking myself to achieve. I remember one call home from officer candidate school with perfect clarity. It was week 6, the absolute pit of misery. I was covered in mud, my muscles screamed with every movement, and I was so tired I could barely form a sentence. I had 5 minutes on a payphone, and I used it to call my mom, my voice cracking as I told her I wasn't sure I could make it. For a brief second, I heard a flicker of concern in her voice. And then she cut me off. "Oh, honey, that sounds tough, but I have to go," she said, her voice suddenly distant. "Tiffany just broke a nail, and she's absolutely inconsolable." She hung up. A broken nail. I was learning to lead soldiers, to navigate under pressure, to stay calm while my body and mind were screaming. And a broken nail was the bigger emergency. That was the pattern. Over the years, I tried. I would send pictures from my overseas deployments, of the desert, of my unit, my real family. They'd glance at them before changing the subject to Tiffany's latest drama with her landlord. I tried to explain what my work entailed, the responsibility I carried, the lives that depended on my decisions. They would just get this blank, polite look on their faces, the one people get when you're speaking a language they have no interest in learning. They didn't just ignore my accomplishments, they actively chose not to see them because they didn't fit into the simple, comfortable story they wanted to tell. Standing there in my parents' dining room, the intercom's message hanging in the air, I realized I had spent a decade trying to get them to see me. But they couldn't. Their version of me was a ghost in a costume. And the woman who just received launch authority, she was a complete stranger to them. For a single solitary second after that call, the old hurt tried to surface. The sting of their laughter, the casual cruelty of my sister's question. It was all there, a familiar ache threatening to pull me under. But then, something else took over. It wasn't a conscious decision, it was a reflex, drilled into me through years of relentless training. The emotional chaos of the room began to recede, the volume turning down until my family's shocked faces were just muted background noise. The hurt was still there, but it was no longer the mission. A different part of my brain, a calmer and more disciplined part, took command. This was the moment I realized I didn't need to gather receipts or dig up old wounds to prove my point. I was wearing my receipts. They were in the crisp creases of my uniform, in the polished shine of my shoes, and in the weight of the insignia on my shoulders. The evidence of my life wasn't something I needed to argue for. It was an undeniable reality they had just crashed into. My plan formulated itself in an instant, and it had nothing to do with revenge. It was far simpler and far more devastating to their world. I was going to follow my orders. The turning point wasn't a scream or a confrontation. It was a quiet internal shift from seeking their love to executing my duty. In that moment, I chose my real life over the role they had assigned me. I decided not to explain, not to justify, and not to give them the satisfaction of a dramatic scene. I would simply be who I was, Major Violet Ward of the United States Air Force. The calm that washed over me was absolute. Their shock, their confusion, their dawning horror. It all became irrelevant data. My objective was clear, and their feelings were not part of the equation. My movements became deliberate, detached from the emotional storm swirling around me. I pulled my secure phone from an inner pocket, my fingers moving with practiced efficiency across the encrypted interface. I wasn't texting friends, I was confirming logistics, acknowledging the directive, my mind already running checklists and protocols. Tiffany's gasp, my mother's whimpers, they were just sounds in a room I was already leaving. I was no longer Violet, the disappointing daughter desperate for a scrap of approval. I was an officer with a time-sensitive life-or-death mission to carry out. My father finally stammered, his voice thin and cracking. "Violet, what in God's name is going on?" I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see my dad. I saw a civilian. I had my orders. The time for family dinner was over. I looked my father in the eye for a beat longer, letting the chasm between his world and mine hang in the air. Then I pushed my chair back from the table. The soft scrape of the wood against the floor was the only sound in the room, and it was as loud as a thunderclap. Every eye was on me, but their gazes were different now. The condescension was gone, replaced by a frantic, grasping confusion. My movements were measured and calm, a stark contrast to the frantic energy radiating from them. I placed my napkin neatly on the table, A final, absurd piece of dinner etiquette in a world that had just been torn apart. "I have to go," I said, my voice even and steady. My sister Tiffany was the first to break, her composure shattering like cheap glass. The smug, confident woman from moments before was gone, replaced by someone pale and trembling. "Go. Go where?" she stammered, her voice high and shrill. "What was that? What is going on? Is this some kind of joke, Violet? Because it's not funny." Her words tumbled out, a desperate attempt to wrestle reality back into a shape she recognized, a world where she was the center and I was the weirdo in a costume. But the insults were hollow now, the barbs had no poison left. She just sounded scared. My mother, true to form, immediately dissolved into tears, her ultimate weapon and defense. "Violet, are you in some kind of trouble?" she pleaded, her hands fluttering at her chest. "You can tell us, honey. Your father and I, we can help you. We can fix it." It was the family mantra, their solution to everything. Absorb me back into their drama. Make my crisis about their ability to save me, to be the heroes of my story. But the problem wasn't something they could fix with a checkbook or a comforting lie. The problem for them was that my reality had just proven to be bigger and more serious than theirs. My father remained silent, his face a mask of disbelief, his mind clearly struggling to reconcile the daughter he thought he had with the major, who had just been given launch authority. It was my little brother Kevin, who finally captured the terrified awe in the room. He had been a ghost, a simple reflection of my parents' and sisters' opinions his whole life. But now he looked at me, really looked at me, for what felt like the first time. The mockery was gone from his eyes, replaced by something that looked almost like reverence. "Major," he said, the title feeling strange and foreign coming from his lips. "Does that mean, like in the movies?" It was a naive question, a child's question, but it was the most honest thing anyone had said all night. He was the only one who had even begun to grasp the scale of what was happening. I didn't answer him directly. I walked to the front door, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the hardwood floor. I could feel their desperate eyes following me. I paused with my hand on the doorknob, and I turned back to face them one last time. They stood huddled together by the dining table, a tableau of confusion and fear, looking small and helpless. My mother's hand was over her mouth, Tiffany was clutching her arm, and my father looked like he had aged 10 years. They were all waiting, desperate for an explanation, for me to translate the last 5 minutes back into a language they could understand. I gave them none of it. Instead, I gave them a single, sharp nod. It was a clean, military gesture, a confirmation, a full stop. It said everything I had failed to say for a decade. Yes, this is real. Yes, that was for me. Yes, the world is bigger and more dangerous than you can imagine. And yes, I am a part of it. As the last vestiges of their denial crumbled, I gave them my final words of the evening, a direct answer to the question that had started it all. "It's not from Amazon." As I drove away, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. For 10 years I had been fighting for a seat at their table. Now they knew. I wasn't just in a different room, I was in a different world. My phone started buzzing before I even hit the end of the street, and it didn't stop. The screen lit up with a frantic, chaotic fireworks display of their panic. There was a text from Tiffany, "You can't just leave like that. What are we supposed to tell people?" Followed by one from my mother, "Violet, please come back, you're scaring us." Then a dozen missed calls from my father, who I don't think had called me more than twice in the past year. Voicemails started piling up, each one a variation on the same theme, not concern for me, but outrage and confusion that I had broken the rules of their carefully managed world. It was a symphony of their self-absorption, and for the first time I felt no obligation to listen to it. I had a mission to focus on, a team waiting for me. I calmly pulled over, put my phone on Do Not Disturb, and tossed it onto the passenger seat. The silence that followed was bliss. 3 months later, that silence had become my new normal. My life was no longer defined by their noise, but by the quiet competence of my real world. I found my family not in a suffocating dining room, but in the sterile, focused environment of a mission briefing room on base. It was a family forged in shared purpose and mutual respect. My commanding officer, Colonel Davies, treated me as a trusted professional. My wingman, a fellow major named Ben, could communicate more with a single raised eyebrow than my sister could with an hour-long monologue. We shared inside jokes that nobody else would get, ate terrible coffee with a smile, and held each other's lives in our hands without ever needing to speak of it. Here, my intensity wasn't a flaw, it was a prerequisite. My discipline wasn't rigid, it was what kept us safe. I wasn't the weirdo in a costume, I was just Ward. And that was more than enough. Then, one day, a letter arrived. It was in my mother's familiar, loopy handwriting. A jarring piece of my old life dropped into my new one. For a moment, my heart stuttered. A foolish, stubborn part of me hoped it might be an apology, a real one. An admission that they had been wrong, that they finally understood. I opened it with trembling fingers. My breath caught in my chest. The letter was cheerful, breezy even, filled with neighborhood gossip and updates on Tiffany's latest boyfriend. And then, I got to the real reason she had written. By the way, she wrote, I was telling my friend Susan about you. You know, her son is thinking of joining the military, and I mentioned that my daughter is a major. She was so impressed. Maybe when you get a chance to visit, you could wear your uniform for the neighbors? They'd get such a kick out of it. I read that paragraph 3 times. There it was. The final, irrefutable proof. There was no apology, no understanding, no remorse. Her only takeaway from that night was that she now had a new, shiny accomplishment to brag about, a new way to get social credit. I wasn't a person to her, not really. I was a prop, a story she could tell at parties. The deep, aching grief I'd carried for years for the family I wished I had. It just evaporated. In its place was a profound and lasting peace. The fight was over because I was finally accepting that I had been the only one fighting. I stood up from my desk, walked over to the small paper shredder in the corner, and fed the letter into it. I didn't rip it in anger. I just let it go. The soft whirring sound was the most satisfying thing I had ever heard. Now, my life is quiet. It's filled with the roar of jet engines, the focused hum of a command center, and the easy laughter of people who have my back. Sometimes I'll idly check Tiffany's social media and see pictures of her brunch dates and complaints about her broken nail, and it feels like watching a show about someone else's life. They continue on in their little bubble, their narrative unchanged. But it doesn't matter anymore, because they have no power over me. They are just people I used to know. I found my purpose, not in their approval, but in the sky. They said my badge was fake, but the truth is, the family I was trying to impress was the illusion. My real life, my real purpose, was waiting for me the whole time. If you've ever had to walk away from people who refuse to see your worth, share your story in the comments. We see you,